Do you believe that God still makes the impossible happen? How many times do we hear that our dreams are too big, that our battles are too difficult, that our situation is impossible to change? Perhaps you yourself have felt that there was no way out, that the doors were locked and that there was no hope. But what if I told you that it is precisely in these moments, when everyone says it is the end, that God's actions reveal themselves in the most powerful way? The story you will hear today is living proof that the impossible is just the perfect scenario for God to work his miracles. When resources run out, when strength runs out, when the whole world turns its back, that's where true faith becomes the key to transformation. This is not just a story of overcoming, it is a story of divine intervention, where faith broke limits, where hope was reborn, and where the impossible was completely defeated by the power of God. From the beginning, everything seemed headed towards failure. Nothing indicated that there would be a happy ending. No human possibilities, no visible help. It was like being in a waterless desert on a starless night. But faith, even as small as a mustard seed, was enough to make way in the midst of impossibility. And it is this faith that changes destinies, that transforms stories, that realizes what the world considers absurd. Have you ever had moments when everything seemed lost? Have you faced situations where they told you to give up, where they mocked your faith, where they laughed at your dream? If so, then you will see yourself in this story, because God is not moved by what human eyes see. God is not limited to diagnoses, numbers, or pessimistic predictions. He is the God of the impossible. He is the God of comebacks. And he is still writing new beginnings today for those who choose to trust. While many gave up, while others disbelieved, one choice changed everything. Trusting God, even without seeing, even without understanding. This simple yet powerful choice opened the door to a miracle no one could have imagined. And that's why you need to follow every detail of this testimony. Because every word, every tear, every twist in this story carries an eternal truth. When we surrender everything into God's hands, the impossible stops being an obstacle and becomes a stage for the manifestation of his glory. Prepare your heart, because what you are about to hear is not only inspiring, it is a living reminder that no situation is irreversible for those who believe. The impossible is just the beginning of what God is about to do. In times like these, where so much uncertainty dominates the world, it is even more urgent to pay attention to the signs. Every miracle story, every transformation, every living testimony is a reminder that God is at work, preparing his children for the final events that are approaching. We cannot afford to live distracted or inattentive. God's action is real, and he is calling those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. Therefore, if this message has already touched your heart, if you understand the importance of strengthening your faith and staying informed about how God is moving in these days, I invite you now, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Each like and each new subscription helps us spread these stories of hope and faith to more people who may be feeling lost, alone, or believing that the impossible can never be reversed. Here, together, we will follow testimonies that not only move us, but prepare our spirit for what is to come. Because one thing is certain, whoever walks close to God walks prepared. And you don't want to be uninformed at a time when his actions are revealed in an even greater way. The story you are about to learn is not about someone distant, unreachable, one of those figures who seem to live in a different reality from ours. On the contrary, our character is someone ordinary, someone who could be your friend, your neighbor, or even yourself. Someone who, like so many of us, had simple dreams, but grand ones in the eyes of those who believe that life can be transformed by faith. His name is Daniel. Since he was young, Daniel has always carried in his heart the burning desire to build a better life for himself and his family. He did not dream of absurd riches, nor did he seek applause or recognition. His greatest desire was to be a provider, to see his parents proud, to build a home where God's love was the foundation. He wanted stability, he wanted security, he wanted, above all, to honor the faith he learned to cultivate since he was little. Daniel's childhood was marked by challenges. He grew up in a simple home where provision often seemed like a daily miracle. Every meal, every new pair of shoes, every bill paid at the end of the month was a reason for celebration and prayer of gratitude. It was there, in that harsh reality, and at the same time full of small miracles, that Daniel learned two lessons that he would carry throughout his life. First, that God always provides. Second, that for those who believe the impossible is just the beginning of the story. Moved by these teachings, Daniel grew up with the certainty that he could achieve his dreams. He studied with dedication, worked difficult jobs, endured exhausting journeys, and never lost hope that, at the right time, the Lord would open greater doors. Whenever he faced a no, whenever life seemed to say, "It won't happen," Daniel remembered the words he heard at home. In God's time, everything comes true. And so, at the age of 25, Daniel decided to take an even bigger step of faith. After years of hard work, he dreamed of opening his own business. It wasn't unbridled ambition. It was the pure desire to use their talents to bless other people, create jobs, and be a living testimony of what God can do through those who are willing to dream together with him. The project was bold for someone who came from so little. A small renovation and construction company. Daniel wanted not just to build houses, but to build homes, to make dreams come true for families that, like his, often needed miracles to stay afloat. His plan was full of purpose, and his heart was full of faith. But as so often happens on the journey of faith, the path would not be easy. From the first moment, opposing voices arose. Friends, acquaintances, even close people began to say words of discouragement. Do you think you will be able to compete with big companies? No one will trust you without experience. You better not deceive yourself, Daniel. Every sentence, every look of doubt was like an arrow trying to pierce the armor of his hope. Still, Daniel stood his ground. In each prayer, he reaffirmed to God his desire not to follow his own paths, but to be guided by the Holy Spirit. Lord, if it is your will, open the doors. But if it is not, teach me to trust, even without understanding. He knew that, to see the impossible happen, it was necessary to trust not only the easy days, but especially the days of silence, the days of waiting, the days when it seemed like nothing was happening, and the days of silence came. After months of planning, adjusted budgets, and a lot of expectations, Daniel finally opened the doors of his small business. At first, the enthusiasm was great. He woke up early, prepared every detail, prayed for every potential client. But week after week, the phone didn't ring. The proposals did not come to fruition, and what seemed like the beginning of a dream began to look like another page of frustration. As the months passed, financial reserves began to run out. The bills started piling up. The fear, which before he could control with prayers and praises, now knocked on the door of his heart with more force. In the midst of so many no's, the question that torments any dreamer arose. Did I hear it wrong? Is God really with me? In moments like this, where despair tries to suffocate faith, we see what we are made of. And Daniel, despite the tears and sleepless nights, chose something that few can do. He chose to continue believing, not because it was easy, not because circumstances encouraged it, but because he knew that God does not contradict himself. If the promise was planted, the fulfillment would come in perfect time. And it's at this point in the story that I want to pause and talk directly to you who are watching. How many times have you seen yourself exactly like this, with dreams that seem impossible, with prayers that don't seem to reach the ceiling, with words of doubt echoing louder than the promises God planted in your heart? If this has already happened or is happening now, I want you to leave a word in the comments that represents your dream. Write, I still believe. Declare, even in the midst of the struggle, that you will not give up. Because Daniel's story is just beginning, and he is living proof that when everyone says it's impossible, God is already setting the stage to do something unbelievable. And I want you to come with me on this journey. There is still a lot to happen, and what is to come will strengthen your faith even more. When Daniel decided to continue believing despite the silence and lack of answers, little did he know that he was just at the beginning of a journey that would test his faith like never before. It was as if the sky itself was silent, as if the promises that once seemed so certain were now hidden behind thick clouds of uncertainty. And it was in this scenario that the real crisis began to emerge. At first, he was still trying to convince himself that it was just a phase, that every beginning was difficult, that it was normal to face challenges. But as time passed and things didn't improve, a feeling of discomfort began to invade his heart. Every dawn, Daniel found himself fighting thoughts that tried to steal the hope he held so dear. With each closed door, doubt whispered louder. With each bill that arrived without enough money to pay, fear tried to find an address. And it was on one of those days of overdue bills and frustrated expectations that Daniel felt, for the first time, something he feared: faith wavering. It wasn't a lack of love for God, it wasn't rebellion, it was just the crushing weight of reality trying to overcome spiritual conviction. It was the fear that maybe it had all just been a dream that was too beautiful for someone like him. Fear of the future, of shame, of bankruptcy, of defeat. The fear that the impossible this time would really remain impossible. Daniel began to lose sleep. Whole nights staring at the ceiling, trying to understand where I had gone wrong. He reviewed every decision, every step, every prayer made. Had I heard wrong? Had he confused his own desire with the voice of God? It was a silent anguish, the kind that accumulates little by little until it fills all the spaces of the soul. Hope, which was once a shining beacon, now seemed like a candle about to go out, flickering with each new breath of difficulty. Amid this internal storm, external pressure was also increasing. Family, friends, even people from church began to question him. Isn't it better to give up? Maybe that wasn't God's will. You need to be more realistic, Daniel. Words that, even when spoken with good intentions, fell like stones on an already wounded heart. Every negative comment felt like a cruel reminder that failure was approaching. Financial difficulties quickly worsened. What was once a concern about bills now became something more serious. Threat of eviction, lack of food, fear of not even being able to survive. Daniel had to sell personal belongings, give up smaller dreams, cut back even more on what was already basic. And even then, it seemed insufficient. The weight of feeling like he was letting down those who believed in him was immense. And, perhaps most painfully, the feeling that I might be disappointing God. One particularly difficult morning, Daniel locked himself in his room and cried like he hadn't cried in a long time. It wasn't just sadness, it was a deep lament, a pain that words could not convey. There, kneeling on the cold ground, he poured out his soul before the Lord. He asked, he begged, he cried, God, where are you? I trusted, I believed, I obeyed. What now? Now I'm alone in the middle of the impossible. His prayer echoed in the empty room, mixed with the choked sound of tears. And it is at this point that I want to take a quick break to talk to you who have been following me here. How many times in life do we feel exactly this? How many times do we try to do everything right, follow the steps of faith, pray, trust, and still find ourselves surrounded by walls of fear, doubts, and uncertainties? If you have ever experienced moments when God's silence seemed deafening, I want you to leave in the comments, Lord, even in silence I trust. Declare it as an act of faith, even if your soul is screaming for answers. Returning to Daniel's story, what he didn't know, and what we often fail to see, is that God never abandons those who hope in him. Even when it seems like heaven is silent, the Lord is working behind the scenes. Even when circumstances scream defeat, God's promise still stands. Even when everything inside us wants to give up, God is still writing our story. But at that point, Daniel couldn't see any of that. For him, all that was left was a fragile faith, sustained only by the memory of what God had already done in the past. And sometimes, that's what saves us. Remembering that the one who performed miracles before has not changed, that the one who promised is faithful to fulfill, that the God of the impossible is still in control, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. The following days were even more difficult. Daniel received billing notices, lost contracts that were almost closed, saw people he trusted walk away. It was as if every area of his life was being shaken at once. Work, finances, friendships, faith, all. And with each new blow, it was as if the question echoed with more force. Is it worth continuing to trust? Is it worth continuing to believe when everything says no? And it is exactly this question that may be burning in your heart today too. Perhaps you have stalled dreams, promises that seem to have been forgotten, prayers that have not yet been answered. And I want to remind you of something essential. True faith is not just believing when everything is favorable. Real faith is continuing to trust even in the dark. It's walking even without seeing the next step. It is believing that the God who brought you here has not abandoned you and will not abandon you. Daniel's story is not over yet. In fact, the greatest miracles happen precisely when everything seems to be lost. And it is exactly there, in the midst of the impossible, in the midst of darkness, that God's light shines most intensely. Therefore, I want to invite you, share in the comments a moment when you also felt this way, surrounded by doubts, but chose to continue trusting. Let's create together a space of faith and hope here, where each story strengthens the other, because God's action is never late. He is not late, does not fail, and much less abandons those who place their dreams in his hands. Daniel's journey is our journey, and what comes next proves that, for God, there is no such a thing as impossible. It was as if the weight of the world had fallen on Daniel's shoulders. The little hope that still shined in his heart now seemed like a flame about to go out. He had done everything he knew. He had prayed, he had fasted, he had trusted. But the scene around him not only didn't improve, it got worse every day. It was as if, instead of answers, new and painful questions were coming. Instead of doors opening, more doors closed before their eyes. The rent on the house where he lived had been late for months, and the threat of eviction was already an imminent reality. The electricity bill was cut. Days without power turned into weeks. At night, the pitch black inside the house seemed to be a portrait of what Daniel felt inside his own soul. Darkness, loneliness, cold. The smell of burning candles filled the room, constantly reminding us that things were far from getting better. An empty refrigerator wasn't just a sign of a lack of food. It was a cruel symbol that everything he dreamed of was falling apart. Rock bottom was not an isolated event. It was a sequence of small ruptures, of broken hopes, of dreams shattered in the silence of cold nights. Daniel, who was once a young man full of faith and courage, now found himself questioning everything, himself, his dreams, even his calling. It was as if he was trapped in an endless desert, walking aimlessly, feeling the hot sand of doubt burning his feet with every step. And the worst thing is that over time, even the voices that previously supported him began to change. People who once said, "It will work out," now murmured, "It's better to accept it." Friends who promised to be there began to disappear. Once hopeful relatives now tried to convince him to give up, and not out of malice, but because it was already clear to them. It was impossible. No one, not even Daniel, could see a way out anymore. Fear of the future has become almost a physical presence in his life. Daniel would wake up with a start, as if he were being suffocated. Nightmares about bankruptcy, abandonment, public shame. The fear of being singled out as another failure, the fear of hearing, "I told you so," the fear of having placed your faith in something that would not bear any fruit. The fear of having made too bad a mistake to deserve a second chance. In the midst of this pain, hopelessness also emerged. A type of emptiness that cannot be filled with words of encouragement, nor with hugs, nor even with prayers said mechanically. Hopelessness was a black hole trying to swallow your soul, telling you that it wasn't worth continuing, that the effort would be in vain. Daniel wondered, does God still see me? Does he care? Or have I gone too far in my own dreams and lost myself along the way? Sometimes he forced himself to leave home to look for work, knock on doors, offer his services, anything that could at least bring him daily bread. But with each denial received, with each look of distrust, Daniel felt shame building up in his chest like an anchor, pulling him down. And the cruelest thing was the comparison. Seeing colleagues thriving, acquaintances achieving their goals, while he seemed parked, invisible, forgotten. The cunning enemy took advantage of every opportunity to whisper lies in your ear. You are not good enough. God will not help you. You are alone. Give up before you are humiliated even more. And Daniel, already physically and emotionally tired, began to believe in these dark voices. He began to accept the narrative of failure as his own identity. He was beginning to think that perhaps rock bottom really was his final destination. There was a specific day that was forever etched in his memory. One day when, without money to even buy bread, without the strength to lift his head, Daniel sat on the floor of the empty room and remained there for hours, without saying a word, without moving a muscle, just existing, just trying to survive that day. At that moment, the faith that once drove him seemed to have dissolved into thin air. All that was left was a wounded boy inside a tired man. All that remained was the memory that one day he believed that God could do the impossible. And this is where I want to extend an invitation to those of you who are following this story. If at some point in your life you have also felt that there was no way out, that all the doors were closed, that even your faith seemed too small to face what lay ahead, share it in the comments by writing, "I know what it's like." Sharing your experience here can not only ease your heart, but also strengthen someone who, right now, may be feeling exactly like Daniel. Going back to that dark day in that empty room, in that tired soul, something began to change. It wasn't a visible change, nor anything spectacular. It was almost imperceptible, but it would make all the difference. Because even when faith seemed to have disappeared, something greater remained within Daniel. A small seed of hope planted by God himself. Even without realizing it, even without strength, even without words, Daniel still breathed. And while there is life, there is hope. As long as the heart still beats, even when injured, there is still room for a miracle to happen. Rock bottom, however cruel it may be, is not the end for those who trust in the God who transforms deserts into rivers. It is not the end for those who understand that darkness is the best backdrop for God's light to shine, even brighter. The bottom of the well is just the place where human forces end and supernatural manifestations of God's actions begin. And it is exactly here, at this deepest point of pain, that Daniel's story begins to change in ways that no one, absolutely no one, could have imagined. It was at the bottom of that emotional well, in that dark and cold room, that something began to move inside Daniel. It wasn't human strength, it wasn't a new plan, it wasn't a miraculous strategy. It was something that was born in the deepest silence, where only God can reach. There, exhausted of all his strength, he realized that there was only one choice left: trust. Not trusting himself, not trusting the resources he no longer had, not trusting friends or the possibilities that had already been exhausted. The only real option, the only true way out, was to throw oneself completely into God's hands. Without having elaborate words, without being able to organize coherent thoughts, Daniel simply knelt down. It was not a beautiful prayer, nor structured, nor worthy of being written in books. It was a raw, sincere, desperate cry. It was the soul torn before a God who sees everything, hears everything, knows everything. "Lord," he murmured in a choked voice, "I don't know what to do anymore. I have no more strength. I have no more hope. If there is still any plan for me, if there is still any promise, I ask you, hold me. Don't let me sink for good." There were tears mixed with disconnected words, sobs that translated better than any sentence the pain that invaded his heart. And in that extreme vulnerability, Daniel didn't ask for riches, he didn't ask for fame, he didn't ask for quick solutions. He asked only one thing, that God would not leave him alone. It was a true surrender, a surrender that did not seek bargains, that did not set conditions. It was as if he was saying, "If I am to walk through this valley, may the Lord walk with me. If I am to continue waiting, may I hope in your promises. If I am to start over from scratch, may it be with your strength, not mine." That prayer changed everything. Even though at that exact moment the external scenario remained the same. The bills remained outstanding. The refrigerator was still empty. The visible problems did not disappear as if by magic. But inside Daniel's heart, something profound happened. True faith began to rekindle. Not faith based on favorable circumstances. Not the faith that depends on immediate signs to survive, but the faith that is born from the certainty that God is faithful, regardless of what human eyes can see. The faith that believes against all odds. The faith that understands that the impossible is just the stage where God reveals his glory. After that prayer, Daniel got up from the ground differently, still fragile, still with tears in his eyes, but with an inner strength that didn't come from him. A supernatural strength, as if the Holy Spirit himself was renewing your strength, breathing life into your tired bones. He didn't know how or when, but he knew God was listening, and that somehow the answer would come. Because God does not despise a broken heart. God does not ignore a faith that cries out, even if it is weak, even if it is as small as a mustard seed. In the days that followed, Daniel began to do something simple but profoundly powerful. He began to live one day at a time, trusting. Every morning, before leaving home, he would bend his knees and leave the day in God's hands. He didn't ask for great miracles. He didn't demand instant answers. It just said, "Lord, your will be done today. I'm here. Use me however you want." And so he started walking again, one step at a time, one prayer at a time, one battle at a time. Of course, fear was still trying to infiltrate. Of course, doubt still knocked on the door at times. But now there was a difference. Daniel had made a choice. The choice to trust God above circumstances, the choice to believe in promises, even when the winds were against them, the choice to keep our eyes on the author of the promise and not on the turbulent waves that threatened to drown him. It is important to understand that trusting God is not an anesthesia for pain. It is not a guarantee that everything will be easy. On the contrary, often trust means keeping walking while tears run down your face. It means continuing to believe while reality screams the opposite. It means planting seeds on dry land, believing that rain will come, even if the sky is still cloudless. Daniel learned this the hard way, but also the truest way. And every day he chose to trust, something new began to move around him, even if he couldn't see it yet. God was acting, behind the scenes, in invisible details at the right time. And this is where I want to pause and talk directly to you, who has been following this journey so far. Maybe you are exactly at that point, without strength, without answers, feeling that rock. Bottom is your current address. Maybe you've prayed, cried, waited, and still the answer hasn't come. If this is your case, I want to invite you to declare in the comments, "I choose to trust." Write this down, not just as a sentence, but as a decision, because sometimes our faith needs to be reaffirmed in the midst of tears. Sometimes our victory begins with a simple choice not to give up. Returning to the story of Daniel, it is impossible not to notice how God works in mysterious ways. The moment he stopped trying to control everything, the moment he surrendered control completely to God, the wheels of the miracle began to move. Not in a spectacular and immediate way like thunder tearing through the sky, but like a thread of hope, silently sowing a new story. Opportunities began to arise in the most unlikely places. Small doors began to open. People he never imagined began to enter his life, bringing with them answers, help, connections that Daniel would never have achieved alone. It was the act of God, discreet but powerful. It was a miracle in the making. Daniel still did not know everything that God was preparing, but he already knew the most important thing, that trusting in God is never in vain. That true faith is planted amid tears, but blossoms amid miracles. And his story, which seemed buried at rock bottom, was about to witness one of the most beautiful new beginnings anyone could imagine. Daniel continued walking by faith, one day at a time. He didn't know how or when, but he chose to believe that the God of the impossible was preparing something that his eyes couldn't yet see. And it was in this scenario of total surrender, where all human hope had already been exhausted, that the miracle began to be woven. On an ordinary morning, like any other, Daniel received an unexpected call. The unknown number flashed on the screen of the simple cell phone he still used, but something in his heart compelled him to answer it. On the other end of the line, a firm but friendly voice introduced himself as the director of a construction company that was looking for independent professionals to take on residential projects that had been stalled. At first, Daniel thought it was a prank. It seemed too good to be true. But as the conversation progressed, he began to understand that this was no coincidence. It was direction. The man explained that he had heard about Daniel from a satisfied customer of a small job Daniel had done months earlier. A job so simple that he himself had almost forgotten about it. But for God, nothing is forgotten. Each seed planted in the soil of obedience blooms at the right time. The proposal was challenging, taking on a major renovation, practically alone, in an upscale neighborhood of the city. The payment would be excellent, more than enough to pay off all accumulated debts and even restart your life with dignity. The only requirement was to start immediately. There was no time to overthink. It was a clear call, almost like an audible answer to the prayers Daniel had prayed in secret. With his heart racing, tears of disbelief in his eyes, he accepted, without knowing how exactly he would manage, without abundant resources, but with a now renewed faith. Daniel said yes. Because when God opens a door, we don't need to understand every detail. We just need to walk through it with courage. In the following days, God's actions manifested themselves in an even more powerful way. People started showing up to help, old friends, strangers, suppliers offering discounts. Materials that seemed inaccessible began to arrive. Satisfied customers began to recommend Daniel for other jobs. In just a few months, what was misery, shame, and fear was transformed into provision, honor, and growth. It was impossible in human eyes for someone bankrupt, discredited, alone, and without resources to get back on their feet so quickly. But God does not need logic to act. He is an expert in turning tables, in transforming defeat into victory, in making the impossible his field of manifestation. Every wall erected, every house restored, every contract signed was like a silent cry to the world. The impossible has happened. God is faithful. Daniel not only paid off all his debts, but managed in a short time to open a new company, now registered and structured, with employees who, like him one day, dreamed of a new chance. And more than financial growth, the biggest miracle happened within him. Daniel's faith was strengthened like never before. No longer a childish faith based on circumstances, but a mature faith based on who God is and not on what he can do. The certainty that even when everything seemed over, God was just preparing an even greater testimony. People started asking how that was possible. Many thought there was some secret, some human strategy behind that impressive turnaround. And Daniel, with humility, always answered the same. It was God. Only God could have done it. Because when the miracle happens, it is unmistakable. It goes without saying. It is so great that no one can receive the glory other than God himself. The transformation in Daniel's life was not restricted to the professional area. Emotionally, he was restored. The fear that once paralyzed him was replaced by courage. The doubt that once gnawed at his hope was replaced by unshakable faith. And the most beautiful thing, Daniel became an instrument of encouragement for others who were experiencing moments of pain and waiting. Each testimony he shared was like a seed of hope planted in the heart of someone who no longer believed. And perhaps that is the ultimate purpose of every miracle. Not just transforming a situation, but transforming hearts. Show everyone that for God, there is no limit, there is no such thing as too late, there is no lost cause. The impossible is just an opportunity for God to reveal his power. Our part is to trust. Our part is to remain even when everything seems contrary. Our part is to choose to believe that the one who promised is faithful to fulfill it. Now, I want to ask you who have been here until this moment. Do you believe that God still performs miracles like this today? Do you believe that the impossible you face can be the next stage for the manifestation of God's actions? If you believe, write here in the comments, I believe in the God of the impossible. Declare your faith, even if today the circumstances have not yet changed, because your declaration of faith could be the first step towards the turnaround you've been waiting for. Returning to the story, Daniel knew that all of that was just the beginning. God had done a lot, but there was still more. Because with God, every miracle is just a new stage in a journey of growth, faith, and purpose. And what seemed to be its end became the mark of an extraordinary new beginning, a fresh start that not only restored what had been lost, but that took Daniel to a level he could never have reached alone. And what comes next is even more surprising. The transformation that God wrought in Daniel's life was so profound that it was not limited to just what the eyes could see. It was something that was born from the inside out. Something that went beyond numbers, contracts, or material achievements. God didn't just restore your financial life. God rebuilt man. The fear that once paralyzed him was now giving way to calm courage. The doubt that once screamed in his mind was now silenced by his unshakable trust in a God who never fails. Daniel was now literally a living testimony that with God, absolutely nothing is impossible. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. His life spoke for itself. Each achievement, each new contract, each client blessed by the excellence of his work was like a chapter written by God's own finger. But more than that, Daniel carried something that no money could buy, the spiritual authority of someone who went through fire and came out on the other side stronger, purer, more like their Creator. Those who once doubted were the first to admire. Those who previously said, it's impossible, now had no words for what they saw. Friends who had grown apart began to get closer, some seeking to know how he managed to win, others seeking a word of hope for their own battles. And Daniel knew he couldn't remain silent. His testimony was not just about success. It was about unshakable faith, about fulfilled promises, about the faithfulness of a God who honors those who honor him. Wherever he went, Daniel told his story, not to exalt yourself, but to exalt the one who made everything possible. In meetings, in services, in simple conversation circles, he shared with a sparkle in his eyes. I was at rock bottom. I cried whole nights. I thought about giving up, but God never gave up on me. He was there, even when I didn't see him. And it was the moment I handed everything into his hands that he made the impossible happen. This new journey for Daniel also brought a new purpose. He understood now that his gifts and talents were not just for his own benefit, but to impact lives. He began to invest part of his profits in social projects, helping underprivileged young people to learn professions in the construction industry, offering them the same chance that he once needed. Each young person reached, each family restored, was yet another living testimony that God is capable of transforming pain into ministry, tears into smiles, loss into missions. Within him, the flame of faith burned brighter than ever, and that flame was visible. His eyes shone not with pride, but with gratitude. His voice carried not just words, but the anointing of someone who was rescued from the abyss by the powerful hand of God. Daniel knew that his life was now a living altar, a place where the glory of God could be beheld. And here, at this point in the story, I need to ask you, do you believe that God can use your pain to write a story even more beautiful than you imagine? Do you believe that the miracle you have been waiting for could be, in the future, the force that will boost other lives? If you believe this, if you feel that God is calling you to trust until the end, leave it in the comments. My story will also be a testimony, because that's what faith is. It is believing not only in what God can do for us, but in what He can do through us. Daniel's life is proof that the impossible is just the beginning for those who give everything to God. When he thought it was the end, when everyone around him had given up, when his own eyes could no longer see beyond the valley of the shadow of death, God was just setting the stage for an extraordinary new beginning. The miracle wasn't just getting Daniel back up. The miracle was to make it a fountain, a channel of blessings, a living witness that God fulfills what He promises, even if circumstances scream otherwise. And maybe you are now living in your own valley. Maybe you identify with the tears, with the tiredness, with the feeling that everything is lost. If this is your moment, I want to encourage you not to give up, to stay, even if it's just for one more day. Because sometimes it's at the next dawn that the sky opens and the impossible becomes reality. God has not changed. The same God who raised Daniel is the God who is watching over you. The same God who restored shattered dreams is the God who is right now looking into your heart and whispering, "It's not over yet, I'm in control." Daniel's story is the story of all of us who once doubted, cried, thought about giving up, but chose to believe. She is the reminder that as long as there is faith, there is a way. As long as there is faith, there will be a fresh start. As long as there is faith, there will be miracles. And you know what? The best chapters of its history have not yet been written, because for God, the best is always yet to come. Your pain today is the fertile soil for your victory tomorrow. Your wait today is the harbinger of a response that will echo beyond your lifetime, impacting generations. So if today you feel that you no longer have strength, that you no longer see a way out, remember, the same God who lifted Daniel from the bottom of the well is looking at you, and He specializes in transforming tears into testimonies, dark nights into mornings of victory, impossibilities into stories of unshakable faith. Stay strong. Keep believing, because the God of the impossible is already preparing His miracle. If this story spoke to you in some way, if at some point you felt that God was ministering to your heart through this testimony, then I want to make a special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel here. Here you will find many other real stories that will strengthen your faith, renew your hope, and remind you every day that for God, nothing is impossible. And if you've come this far, to this final moment, it's because the Holy Spirit is calling you to experience something new too. So right here in the comments, I choose to trust God. Write with faith. Write declaring about your life. Because your decision today could be the first step towards God's impossible beginning to manifest itself in your story. And what God did in Daniel's life is just a small sample of what He still has in store for those who trust. In the next video, you will learn an even more impactful story where the answer came when everything seemed silent and faith was the only bridge between despair and victory. A journey that will strengthen your heart even more and show you that in God's time, every tear turns into a miracle. Get ready, because each testimony is a seed of hope being planted in your spirit.